Good morning. Good to see you. Hope you had a good weekend. Hope you had a good first day of the week yesterday. Appreciate you tuning in today. Last week on Monday, we talked about a good Pharaoh and we looked at when Joseph served Pharaoh as many people were saved and talked about some of the good traits of that Pharaoh that Joseph was dealing with. Well, today we're going to be thinking about a bad Pharaoh and we're going to be looking in Exodus. And to get over there and to read a little bit and just come along with me in Exodus chapter 1. Once again, let me get it up there for us. In Exodus chapter 1, at verses 1 through 7, go through and talk about as the children of Israel, verse 7, were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now, chapter 1, verse 8, to think about a bad Pharaoh. Says, Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And we'll pause right there because I think that's one of the main points as we think about a bad Pharaoh. He either was not taught about Joseph, or he had forgotten about what Joseph had done, or he ignored what Joseph had done. He is so afraid, and we don't have time to read the whole chapter. Hopefully, you're familiar with it. But they're terrified because the Hebrews are multiplying and they're increasing more and more. And there may have been more of them than the Egyptians. That's what they're scared of, anyway. It is hard for me. Sometimes we think, because it says in the account, who did not know Joseph. And we think, well, he had just forgotten Joseph. Well, think about the Hebrews. It's kind of hard to forget the Hebrews, when there's hundreds of thousands of them out your back door. It's kind of hard to forget the Hebrews and forget how the Hebrews came to be there. So I'm not sure if, to think about the language, I think perhaps it's more he may have just ignored the lessons from the past. His predecessor from years gone by, not his father, but the Pharaoh that Joseph dealt with, that Pharaoh was a good Pharaoh, and he recognized a good man in Joseph, and he listened to him. But this Pharaoh, he's ignoring those lessons. So he was either not taught about Joseph, and we might think about the how parents need to teach their children good lessons. Parents need to teach their children what's right. He either was not taught, he had forgotten, or he simply ignored. I kind of lean more towards the third one, just when you really think about it. But regardless, he's this is where it kind of begins with the bad Pharaoh. He did not fear God. He did not fear God. There is to contrast this Pharaoh with the Pharaoh from last week, dealing with Joseph. That Pharaoh, the good Pharaoh, he recognized, and I'm not saying that he necessarily believed in Jehovah, but he recognized godliness in that sense. And you can go back and watch that video to see the verse. He recognized some sort of godliness in Joseph. He recognized it. But here, this Pharaoh did not fear God. And where that comes from, to look at our passage a little bit later, there in chapter 1, verse 13, the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. The midwives, unlike Pharaoh, feared God. They feared God. It's an interesting account. We might think about it more next week. But at the very least, we can say they feared God. Pharaoh did not fear God. He had not learned, or he had ignored, or he had forgotten lessons from time past, and he in no way feared God. He had no compassion as well. And to look back in the account, it's interesting, to look back in it at chapter 2, or we'll look at the end of chapter 1. Pharaoh gives a command: every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. But in chapter 2, you have the birth of Moses, man of the house of Levi, went and took as a wife, daughter of Levi. She conceives, bears a son. Um, when she could no longer hide him, took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt, pitch, put the child in it, laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. His sister stood far off to know what would be done to him. That's Miriam. Verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. Her maidens walked on the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Now, my point in reading that and to think about it is, she hears that baby weep. She hears that child weep. She hears that child weep and she has compassion. Think about Pharaoh, who has no compassion. He's willing to give a command that says all the male children are to die. He has no problem. He has no problem with genocide. He's willing to kill babies. He's willing to give the command, I should say, to kill babies. He has no compassion. But when his daughter sees the child, and when his daughter hears the child weep, hears the baby weep, lo and behold, she has compassion. And she says, this is one of the Hebrews' children. You might consider it. Pharaoh had distanced himself, and because of that distancing, it allowed him to be cold and compassionless. His daughter gets near one, hears it weep, sees it with her own eyes, hears it with her own ears, hears Moses, baby Moses, with her own ears, and lo and behold, what does she do? She has compassion. You might think about that idea. Sometimes we distance ourselves from situations, and it causes us to have no compassion. If we would draw near and to see and to hear, it might drive us to have more compassion. Pharaoh had no compassion. His daughter, all of a sudden, she found it. You might also think about Pharaoh, and pardon me, that up on the screen I just saw, this is not a good Pharaoh, this is a bad Pharaoh. And pardon me for making that mistake, using the same slides, same template from last week. Bad Pharaoh, not a good Pharaoh. This bad Pharaoh, he was illogical. He was absolutely illogical. And to look back at the account, to back up to chapter 1, I want you to think about just how illogical he was. Oh, verse 9. Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, they also join our enemies and fight against us, and go up out of the land. So they set taskmasters over them, to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. They're in dread. So they make them serve with rigor. They enslave them. And of course, they keep multiplying. And then you start having the command about the babies being killed. Now, to think about the account, and I really would argue, just think about how illogical this Pharaoh is. This was his workforce. This was his workforce. They were building supply cities. He's worried about, well, if my enemies attack, they might join my enemies. Well, here's an idea. Why don't you ally yourself with them? Why are you killing? He's trying to diminish his own workforce and possibly those who could serve him in some sort of capacity if his enemies attacked. Why would you diminish why would you diminish your workforce or possibly even your army, your soldiers? They could serve you in that capacity. Why would you diminish them? And that's what's happening, right? They're working for him because he's making them, but they're working for him. He's killing his workers. Does that make any sense? Talking to someone recently, the devil, the devil fools us. And when we follow the devil, we are fools. We are foolish. And we do things that are not logical. It is absolutely foolish what Pharaoh is doing. He's killing his workers. Why would you do that? It's because he's paranoid, frankly, and that's another thing that he is. But it's just simply not logical. Nope, he's not a good Pharaoh. He's a bad Pharaoh. That's what he is. So you might think about the points that we've made. Appreciate you tuning in today for this brief consideration of just a little bit of Exodus on this Monday. Hope you have a good day. Hope you have a good week. Hope you're able to tune in tomorrow for another brief look into God's Word. Thanks for being with us today.